It's time for a Big Blue Kickoff Live.
Nobody can ever tell you that you couldn't do it, because you did.
On Giants.com.
You know what I saw? New York Giant pride.
And the Giants mobile app.
17-14 is the final. One touchdown, we are world champions. Believe it, and it will happen.
Part of the Giants Podcast Network.
Let's go out there like a bunch of crazy dogs. Have some fun.
Welcome to Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live here on Giants.com YouTube, as well as the mobile app. He's Paul Dottino. I'm Lance Medow with you for the next 60 minutes. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. Multiple ways that you can interact with us here on the program. You give us a ring, 201-939-4513. You can also interact with us on Twitter, hashtag Giants Chat. He is at GiantsWFAN. I am at Lance Medow. One word, last name, Medow, as we are broadcasting for the Giants Podcast Studio, presented by Hackensack Meridian Health. Keep getting better. And the archive of this show and our entire podcast network is on the Giants mobile app, podcast platforms everywhere, and at Giants.com/podcast. So a lot to tackle over the course of this program. We'll get a report from our very own John Schmeelk from the Senior Bowl. We'll also get into some movement on the coaching front, as well as the Pro Football Hall of Fame, which is stealing a lot of headlines as well, with leaks here or there in terms of the results for the vote, which will be unveiled during the honors ceremony, which will come right before the Super Bowl, as we put an exclamation point on this latest campaign. And we're going to hear from John shortly, but clearly the Senior Bowl is going on. And I think one thing, Paul, that gets also lost in translation, while the executives are looking at prospects and starting to get their draft boards in order and so forth, the other thing that goes on at the Senior Bowl is you have an opportunity to speak to everybody across the league. And you're going to see more of this, of course, at the Scouting Combine in Indianapolis. But there are still, remember, franchises that are trying to finalize their coaching staffs. And sometimes there's some wheeling and dealing and conversations on that front that goes on at the Senior Bowl. So it's not just about analyzing prospects. I'm not saying that people are dismissing everything else. But if you recall, Joe Shane and the Carolina Panthers, were doing some negotiating in terms of the Burns trade down at the Senior Bowl not too long ago.
Well, that's where the spark started. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
I don't know if there was negotiation.
No, but the conversation came up in passing.
Yes. The topic of Burns possibly being moved, we do know that from NFL Films' clips, it did begin there. So one never knows what could grow out of this week.
And that's why I think in the back of your mind, you got to keep that at least flowing through the conversation, because there are foundational pieces, to your point, that could be built that may not show up until a month later or 2 months later, but they were at least initially thrown out to see whether or not they could create some buzz or come to fruition. And trades are something that is going to hit first, as well as free agency, remember, before we get to the draft. And you and I even tackled a little bit of this conversation on Tuesday's program, where we fielded a lot of phone calls about what direction the Giants are going to go in the draft. And we said, listen, Wan'Dale Robinson, Jermaine Illuminor, the decision-making process on that front has to happen first. The dominoes have to fall into place there.
Cordell Flott, too.
Correct. He's another one in terms of the secondary before we even can wrap our heads around what the Giants want to tackle in the draft. Not to say that it's all need-oriented with the 5th overall pick. At the end of the day, you want to take the best player, somebody that is going to have the most overall impact. But let's not be naive. If they lose somebody in free agency, they don't think the free agent options outside of the organization are attractive, then clearly the first area to tackle this would be through the draft, potentially even the 5th overall pick.
You know, Lance, I think when we all look at this team and we understand that there's a new coaching staff, okay, that's a whole lot of stuff and a whole lot of mystery right there, right from the get-go. But the other thing we don't know, okay, and I'm going to give you a good example. Let's take a look at guys like Jalen Hyatt, guys like Tay Banks, who certainly have underachieved during their time with the Giants. Banks has shown more flashes than obviously Jalen Hyatt has.
I mean, Hyatt had flashes his first year. Since then, there hasn't been
They were
much
more like little
production-wise.
sparkles, not
well,
so
but
much
at least there
flashes.
was some productivity,
Okay.
is my point. You know, he had a few triple-digit
And
games. He had that
both
big
guys-
touchdown against Arizona and so forth.
Yeah, they've both been significant underachievers since, for various reasons. Okay. Well, here's part of this equation that we don't know. When John Harbaugh comes in here, and then his DCs and his OCs and brings the rest of his staff in here, remember something. Banks was a number 1 draft choice. He was a first rounder. Hyatt was a third rounder. Okay? It is highly likely that John Harbaugh, maybe Harbaugh himself, I'm sure he talked to Banks in the pre-draft process. Maybe whoever
he was also a
brings
Maryland
in,
guy, remember. He was right down there.
Correct.
Where Harbaugh was coaching.
So I'm sure he knows an awful lot about Tay Banks.
Yep.
And he probably knows something about Jalen Hyatt, too, because he was one of the more heralded receivers coming out of that draft, even though he was a second-day pick. I think it's certainly going to be interesting to find out what is the dynamic between Harbaugh and his new coaches with 2 players who to this point have underachieved. Because if Harbaugh and his guys come in here and say, look, undoubtedly they're going to say you're going to get a clean slate. But what were their thoughts? What were their impressions? How much were they confident that these guys were going to be good NFL players? It may be a whole new lease on life for those 2 players.
Well, we'll get a little bit more into that, and we talked about this even earlier in the week. His perspective, Harbaugh, on the current roster is going to shape Joe Shane's thinking and some of the other elements that'll be in play when they put the roster together here moving forward. All right, I mentioned off the top that we'd get a report from the Senior Bowl, Mobile, Alabama, where it is a blistering 54 degrees right now. Do you believe that compared to here? I mean, that's pretty much the Bahamas, essentially. So we bring in our very own John Schmeelk, who is taking in all the action there. How we doing, Schmeelk?
John?
He's a man of very few words, which is an extreme rare occurrence.
We lost him.
We apparently have some technical issues in the early stage. All right, so we'll get back to John when we can work that out and hear him talk, which would be critical when it comes to the dialogue. But, yeah, I jokingly was mentioning the weather because, I mean, remember, the entire country was hit by this storm. And, you know, there was concerns even in the southern part of the United States, you know, whether or not all of these events that are going on in the mid to latter stages of January would be impacted. And Mobile, Alabama is starting to literally heat up, at least compared to the rest of the country. So that's a positive. And this is going to be an opportunity for a lot of players also to improve their stocks. The one thing I also love about the Senior Bowl, or at least I find the most attractive element, is some of the players from lesser-known D1 programs or outside of D1 get recognition because they now get to test their skill set against players that they had no chance of going up against because of what their schedules exposed them to. And I think, you know, that is something that can open up doors and do wonders for certain prospects. I mean, case in point, the NFL.com, the league website, was putting together some of their standout players, and one, for example, that has caught the attention of a lot of people is Tyron Montgomery, wide receiver from John Carroll University, who has an interesting background. He's a former LSU basketball walk-on, but here's a player that has showcased his speed and his burst and his agility. And how many people were paying attention to John Carroll football during the course of the season? No disrespect to the program, but I'm using that as an example to say sometimes these gems, okay, really can showcase what they're about, and now all of a sudden you start hearing more about them once we get to the draft.
Well, this is the last chance for these guys to show something in a competitive atmosphere. Because remember, after this, the combine is not a competition. You're going up against your own numbers. And then, of course, what happens when you get to your pro day? Well, you're trying to enhance the numbers that you may have put out at the combine.
Sure.
There's no more competition against other people at your position. And so that's why this particular week for the scouts, for the personnel directors, for the coaches, becomes really, really important, because it's their last chance to see somebody, whether it's the practices where they're in the one-on-ones, they're in the positional battles, or for that matter, in the game. And I know a lot of people say, well, the game doesn't matter. No, the game does matter, because you're now putting that player once again in the environment of competition. I don't understand people say, well, you know, the practices, the game, the game's not a big deal. Who cares? I don't even watch the game. No, because you want to see. I'm not necessarily even talking about grading the player's tools in the Senior Bowl game or the Shrine Bowl game. What I'm talking about is how do they react to the atmosphere of competition? Maybe it's like the guy gets beat on a 30-yard pass down the sideline. How does that corner react? What does he look like? Does he look like he's a crybaby? Does he look like he's blaming somebody else? He's pointing fingers at somebody else? Or, hey, he got beat. He's coming back to the huddle. You see he's got like, my bad. And now on the next play, he breaks up the next pass. That's the kind of stuff that I'm talking about, where coaches will tell you and scouts will tell you, I wanted to see how the guy reacted to certain things. The game will tell you that. You can't do that at the combine. You can't do that at the pro day.
You could also see a little bit of that during practices, though, at the Senior Bowl.
Sure.
If they give up a big play and then they come back the next rep, how do they respond?
No question. But the game is your last chance to see it.
Well, if memory serves me correctly, Dave Gettleman, okay, when he was the Giants general manager, if you recall, he stayed for the game the year Daniel Jones was in the Senior Bowl. And more often than not, some of the executives, they leave because they've seen enough during the course of practices. Right. They've spoken to the players. But he wanted to get another glimpse of him in person.
It's one more
in
day.
A game setting.
It's one more day out of your schedule. Why not take advantage of it and see if there's something else you can glean?
No, I'm completely with you. If you're already there geographically and you have nowhere to go, to stay an extra day, I don't think is going to hurt you. If anything, it will help solidify your feelings and emotions with respect to a specific player.
Jackson Dart had a nice game last year.
Yeah. Well, the Giants have had a track record. They've gone after a lot of players in recent history who have taken part in the Senior Bowl. And especially from a quarterback perspective, I mean, the definition, just look at the label of the game. It's called the Senior Bowl for a reason. But we talk about this when you're evaluating quarterbacks, and I think even in recent history around the league, when you have somebody that has multiple years starting experience on the college level, it gives you a little bit more substance to analyze, and you're not playing as much of a guessing game. Not to say that there haven't been quarterbacks that have panned out, even though they have a limited resume in college, but to have multiple years under their belt of what they've done game in and game out, I think it gives you a much better read. And I know that's a little bit of an old school philosophy going back to Bill Parcells, but it lives and there's truth to it even to this day. And I think you're probably going to see more and more of that being adopted across the league, whether it's going after a quarterback in free agency or it's drafting somebody. I mean, case in point, not to get off topic here, but while we're on the subject of multiple years starting, I just wonder what the market's going to be like for Malik Willis this year, right? Who showed some nice flashes backing up Jordan Love, but has very limited, Paul, opportunities even on the NFL level, limited opportunities in college too, and you just wonder, does that shy some teams away? All it takes is one, of course, but that thinking, I think, still applies to the NFL level, is what I'm getting at.
I think that's fair. You know, I just wonder, with the impatience of today's league, where teams are very quick to pull the plug on coaches. We've seen that, and it's happened here too. I'm not trying to run away from that. And you got to wonder, when guys have conviction about a player or they think they see something, and it's going to take time to groom him or fix him or rebuild him, how many people are going to be willing to take that shot when they know they may not have enough time to fully get the reclamation project to fruition or the developmental project to fruition? You know, that it's not the 5-year plan like it used to be back in the 70s and 80s. When a coach was hired, he had a 5-year plan, and you could groom. Well, then again, what happened? Free agency kind of ripped that to shreds too. Because now, you know, usually after 4 years, of course, if you get the first-round pick, he gets the 5th-year option. But your team is being ripped to shreds. By the time you get to the 4th year, you may not recognize 2/3 or 3/4 of your team. So how are you supposed to take a gamble on a guy like a Malik Willis? Let's say you truly believe that you saw things you liked in him, and you're a team that needs a quarterback. And you want to take that flyer. You want to take that stab. Think, maybe Malik Willis can do something for us. Are you going to be less likely to take that stab because today's climate wants to get rid of you within 15 seconds if you don't win?
Well, and also, if you're a general manager and a head coach, you may not be able to reap the rewards of when actually the player clicks too. So, that may enter their mindset as well. All right, we think we have worked things out, and we have John Schmeelk on the line. So let's bring in John as we get our latest report from the Senior Bowl. John, how we doing?
So Lance's attempt to sabotage the phone, so I couldn't call.
I have not touched one of the wires. I am getting too much credit in this department if you're going to go down that road.
How's it going, guys?
Hey, John, we've talked a lot about your travels, so let's just get right to the meat and potatoes of why you're there. I understand there was a brawl yesterday, or at least a fight yesterday during Senior Bowl practice. Can you fill the people in on that one?
Yes, there was a couple of swings at the end of one-on-ones in the second practice of the day. I believe, let me look at the roster to make sure. I always get which is national, which is American mixed up. That would have been the American team practice late in the day. So that set of defensive linemen has been particularly chatty over the course of one-on-ones. Whenever they win, they would definitely let the offensive line know about it. And they were getting the best of the group, to be honest with you. And it was Derek Moore from Michigan, who's having a heck of a first 2 days. He's been very good, 6'3", 254, 34-inch arms, but he plays with more power than that 254 pounds might indicate. The only guy that's really been able to block him or Zion Young, who's also on that team all week, has been Max Iancher from Arizona State, who's 6'5", 325, 34.5-inch arms. He's not super experienced playing football. I believe he's Nigerian, if I'm not mistaken. But he's really been the only guy who's been able to block into those edge rushers. And, he got a little tired of, I think, the defensive lineman talking. So he blocked Moore again. He had stopped Zion Young earlier in the practice. And, I think Moore got annoyed because he had been talking and he got stopped. He doesn't like that. So he pushed, he shoved. They kind of grabbed each other a little bit. Both guys took a couple of swings. They got separated. No one connected. No one got hurt. So no harm done. But I actually talked to Drew Fabianich, who runs the Senior Bowl today. I asked him about it, and he's like, "Yeah, go out there. If you're mad, do another rep, get him on the field." So they like the passion, they like the enthusiasm, but obviously you don't want guys swinging at other guys wearing helmets. Nothing good's going to come out of that.
Yeah, not a good idea.
Also doesn't help your cause in terms of all the executives being down there in terms of personality and how you handle adversity. So that won't help their cause either. I know your latest report, John, speaking of the trenches, you focused the other day on watching the offensive linemen and the defensive linemen, and one guy in particular that I know that you had highlighted who arguably could be one of the best pass rushers is T.J. Parker of Clemson. What is about his skill set that stands out maybe compared to the rest of the group, at least what you're seeing down there?
Yeah, I don't think he's an elite pass rusher yet, right? He doesn't have a ton of moves. He's not like a super big speed bendy guy, but, he's 6'3", he's 263, he's got over 33-inch arms. He is just a very long, powerful young man, and he was consistently, getting his hands inside, long-arming guys, pushing them into the backfield, and he did it again and again and again. And I just think that's a really good base to work off of, right? That's a good place to start. And if he can just continue to build his pass rush repertoire off of that, making moves and having some counters to that. I talked to a couple people here. He's apparently a coachable kid. He's a good kid. I talked to him. That interview can be found on the Giants Huddle podcast where he wants to get better. So I think he's got the size and all the tools to, continue to improve off of his pretty good physical tools, even though he's not kind of like the quick, fast, bendy type.
John, usually when folks go to this thing for the week, it's hard to keep track of everything every single day. But who is still left on your list? Guys who you really wanted to see that maybe you haven't got a good look at, and today in the final practice session before the game on Saturday, you're going to say, hey, you know what? I got to make sure I see this guy because I haven't gotten a good chance yet.
Yeah, today I'm kind of going to focus on the linebackers, tight ends, and running backs. I've kind of kept eyes on them during team periods and stuff like that, but I haven't really watched their one-on-ones or anything like that yet. My first written report was the wide receivers and DB. Second written report, as Lance mentioned, it was offensive linemen and defensive linemen. Fans should go to Giants.com, go find those. It's very detailed on a lot of the players. So a couple of the guys from those groups, Paul, that kind of had me a little excited.
Yep.
I really like what I've seen from Mike Washington Jr. out of Arkansas. He's 6 feet tall, 228 pounds. He is a big boy, but he's elusive. He's made some nice cuts. He's shown some good vision. So he's a running back that has kind of gotten my attention as I believe he's the heaviest running back here at 228. No, I take that back. Adam Randall out of Clemson is 233, also a big back. But, he's one of the backs that have really kind of caught my eye early, just kind of watching team drills. Mike Washington, Kalen Black from Indiana, the national champions. I think he's the guy that has run the ball pretty well since I've been here. And then you have the two Penn State backs, Katron Allen and Nick Singleton. Singleton's more of your speed guy. Allen's more of your banger between the tackles, but I've seen both guys make some plays. It's a pretty good tight end group. You've got a couple flex tight ends. Tanner Koziel out of Houston. He's someone that told me in my interview with him that he's trying to show teams that he can get his head in there and be a blocking back. Joshua Cuevas out of Alabama is another flex tight end. But then you have the Paul Dottino tight ends. You got Will Kazmarek out of Ohio State, 6'5",
there you go,
260, big guy that can block. He can play both ways. He's a guy that's impressed me. So you have a nice little kind of mix of guys that can be in-line, that can be receivers. But this tight end group, in the draft and in this game in general, have actually more in-line tight ends than we've seen before. John Michael Gillenborg from Wyoming, another guy that can block a little bit. Sam Roush out of Stanford, he's 259 pounds. So you have enough guys here that can block, as well as the guys that I would consider more flex tight ends. And then, guys, it's a really good linebacker group. Like we've talked about it, the off-ball linebacker classes have not been great, but this is a pretty good group. The guy that's caught my eye the most so far is Bryce Betcher out of Oregon. He's 6 feet tall, 227 pounds. He is a terror in the run game. He forced a fumble the other day. He's constantly getting in the hole, stopping guys for tackles for losses. He's been everywhere. I want to watch him in pass drills today to see how he covers. Jacob Rodriguez, someone you guys are probably familiar with from the Texas Tech run in the college football playoffs, 6'1", 233. He's a tackling machine. He gets downhill. But again, much like Betcher, I want to see what he does in coverage. I watched Caleb E. Lamzor the other day and Kyle Lewis. Kyle Lewis is a smaller backer. I had him on the Giants Huddle podcast, 5'11 and a half, 224 pounds. He's not really a banger, but he's not small enough to be a safety. He's kind of a coverage off-ball linebacker type. So I want to see kind of where I think he can fit in the NFL. I think he might be a bit of a tweener. And then Caleb E. Lamzor, who's 6'1", 233, I thought his coverage snaps the other day were simply fantastic, to be honest with you. I thought they were great. So he's a guy I want to kind of watch in the run game today to see how he can do as a little bit more of a banger. And obviously we're going to see some of the safeties cover those guys. Jalen Kilgore is a safety here that a lot of people like. The Oregon State safety that was a late call-up, I think, has done a pretty good job, Skylar Thomas. So those are all guys that I think we can keep an eye on over the last day, and that's what my written and video report's going to focus on, that linebacker, tight end, and running back group.
All right, John, I just want to go quickly in reverse for just a moment because there's only a practice left. Are there any guys who you really thought you were going to be thrilled to see, because you and Tony Pauline and the rest of your crew on the Huddle who do the draft show here on Giants.com as well.
Draft season.
Draft season. I know, but you've had those guys on the Huddle too.
Yes, we do. Yes.
So my point is, that are there guys that you were really, really looking forward to seeing, and now you've gotten down there and it's like, oh no, they're just not what I thought they were, and they've really bummed you out?
That's a really good question, Paul. Nobody has really, I don't think, disappointed, to be honest with you. Maybe Max Llewellyn from Iowa. He's 6'5", 255, and on tape you see all the traits, but he really hasn't flashed that much when he's gotten to some of these one-on-one situations. I want to see what the corners do on the third day. I think Colton Hood hasn't been quite as good as I thought he was going to be. Mm-hmm. We've had some catches on him. And he's supposed to be a first round cornerback, right? So I want to maybe see a little bit more out of Colton Hood. He's maybe been slightly disappointing watching these guys. Defensive tackle wise, Banks hasn't been as consistent as I would like, Paul. He's had some flash plays.
Okay.
And I'm going to talk about him today a little bit, but I don't think down to down he's been fantastic. So those are the guys mostly that I would mention. The wide receivers, so many guys dropped out. None of these guys were really, players that I was super excited about seeing.
Right.
You're going to like Malachi Field-Paul out of Notre Dame. That's going to be a guy you should circle on your. He's a skyscraper. You'll like him.
We all get to see Notre Dame because they're on TV every weekend. And yes, I've absolutely noticed him on those broadcasts. He's a player that I absolutely like a lot.
Yeah, I was talking to Drew Fabianis, and he actually told me today that talking to scouts, they haven't really seen anyone here that looks out of place. Everyone looks like they fit. So I think
that's good.
The Senior Bowl scouts have done a pretty good job of getting the right players here.
John, I know that the Giants are not looking for a quarterback per se, but there are 6 on the roster, and just in terms of where the Giants are selecting, is there buzz at all that somebody could skyrocket as a result of their performance? I mean, Pavi is on the roster. I mean, he's one guy that obviously had a really good collegiate year, but is there maybe anybody who fell under the radar this season? Taylon Green, I know, has gotten a lot of chatter. You brought up the running back from Arkansas, and, he obviously had some flashes this season. Anyone in particular under center that perhaps could really help their cause over these next few days?
Yeah, Lance, good question. And I haven't talked about the quarterbacks much. I'll probably do that in my written report today, too. I think Garrett Nussmeier is a guy that people love coming into the year.
Yep,
and he had a down year. He was very banged up. He was never really healthy. I've listened to him talk. He's super smart. I see him coaching other guys on the field. Remember, his father, Doug Nussmeier, was a quarterback coach for the Cowboys and a lot of other teams. I think he was head coach too at some point in college. So I think he's the guy that could maybe pop himself into day 2 consideration if he really continues to play well and has a good game. I still think there's love out there for him, and I think he's throwing the ball pretty well out here when healthy. But Taylon Green is the guy that draws your attention. 6'6", 229. He'll probably run in the 4.5s. He is a cannon. But, the art of playing quarterback stuff, the anticipation, getting the ball out on time, that's the stuff he's still got to work on. But a team will definitely take a day 3 flyer on him. And if it doesn't work out at quarterback, quite frankly, he's probably a good enough athlete to play tight end at that size. So I wouldn't be surprised if who was the guy that Buffalo drafted?
Jackson.
He was from Buffalo.
Jackson.
Tyree Jackson?
Yeah.
Does that sound right?
That was him. He was here on the Giants practice squad, remember?
Yes, correct.
Yep.
Very, very similar to him in terms of body type.
Well, and even another guy that comes to mind, Logan Thomas, is another converted quarterback, if you remember, too. So we've seen a few of them. He was with Washington, from Virginia Tech. So it's not unheard of that players make the transition from that regard.
John, final thought from me, and certainly I'm going to be looking forward to watching the game. In your mind, as you look at the defensive tackle spot, when we talk about a plugger, a run stopper, big physical son of a you-know-what on that defensive front, is there one guy in particular? I know we've talked about Banks before, and he's coming off the injury and everything else. Is there one guy that you really want me to take a look at when I see the game?
Yeah, Banks would be the guy. I think Hunter Lee out of Texas Tech has had some moments. He's 6'3", 220, so he's not like they don't have any gigantic nose tackles here, Paul, that are like 340, 350. But I think Hunter Lee out of Texas Tech is someone you can keep an eye on. Devin Eastern out of Minnesota and Bryson Eason out of Tennessee have had a couple of moments over the course of the week.
Okay.
But no, I mean, who was the kid out of Oregon last year that ended up getting drafted by the Chargers, turned out to be a really good player? I forget his name, but you know what I'm talking about. He's like a gigantic defensive tackle. I wouldn't put anyone into that category in terms of size that you can plug in as like a backup nose to Dexter and feel good about it right away.
All right.
Well, the biggest guy is who John mentioned, Hunter Lee, at 320 pounds. So even though he may not be big compared to some of the other guys in the NFL, I mean, that's some meat and potatoes that is filling out. The next closest is
anybody's
Chris
bigger than you,
McKellen.
Lance. I mean, come on.
Well,
give
that
me a
goes
break.
without saying, yeah. Well, I hate to break it to you. 320 would be humongous next to you, too, Paul. So,
I know, but that guy could eat you for lunch.
Let's not make it sound as if,
come on now.
And he could eat you for breakfast and dinner. And a snack as well. All right, Schmeelk. Listen, enjoy Mobile, Alabama, and we'll speak to you over the next few days.
Yeah, I have to see when my connecting flight is tomorrow. I might be in the Atlanta airport when you guys start the show. If that's the case, I'll pop on. I will let Pearson know. And, Lance, I did note that you had to, of course, when you asked about the quarterbacks, you had to mention the 5'9" one. I did take note of that, by the way.
That's why, hey, we're more than happy. We're an equal opportunist operation here, okay?
He's trying to get Flutie to come out of retirement, John.
Well, look, Baker wasn't a big guy, and he's still going strong, so you know how my feelings are on that regard. So,
all right, John, enjoy.
Baker ain't 5'9", boys. I'll
there we
talk
go.
to you later.
Absolutely. I'll drink to that. All right, Schmeelk, take it easy. Appreciate him weighing in on the latest from the Senior Bowl. So covered a few different positions. And once again, if you want to read in greater detail about some of the offensive linemen, the defensive linemen, his latest report is up there on Giants.com. There are several other features up on the team's website, too, if you want to delve into some greater detail on that front. Few other things that I want to get to, and we'll have some lines open up here at 201-939-4513 moving forward. You can also hit us up on social media. He's at Giants WFAN. I'm at Lance Medow, one word, last name, Medow. We talked about the coaching cycle earlier in the week and how moves that are going on across the NFL wind up impacting the Giants. And I don't know how much you got to this yesterday because I think the news was coming out just maybe when you were on.
Some of it.
Todd Monken, we learned,
we did,
has been hired as the Cleveland Browns coach, and there have been a lot of reports that Harbaugh was interested perhaps in bringing his colleague from the Ravens. And this is why you and I emphasize that, number one, the team is not going to make anything official for that very reason because there's still positions in play. And the other example I'll give you is we brought this up on Tuesday. Brian Daboll, there have been a lot of reports that he is going to be Tennessee's offensive coordinator and joining forces with Robert Saleh, who was with the Jets at the time. But Daboll's still in the mix for the Raiders head coaching job. So if the dominoes fall there at least needs to be a contingency plan for Tennessee, perhaps.
Well, there were also reports out of Tennessee that Shea Tierney, the quarterback's coach from the Giants, and Carmen Brasillo, the offensive line coach of the Giants, are going down there to join Daboll in Tennessee.
Yep.
But this goes back to that whole thing that we've talked about where you have some coaches that they're tethered together. And, for example, there have been a lot of reports out there that wherever Todd Monken wound up going, he was going to bring the offensive line coach from the Ravens with him. Well, guess what? Todd Monken is now in Cleveland. Yep. And so the reports are saying now that the Ravens O-line coach is going to go with him. You get all of these tethering situations going on, and that's why, folks, until a deal is actually signed and it's official, and that guy is your employee, until that happens, there are tentacles reaching all over the league right now that may or may not come to fruition.
And you also don't know what assistants are thinking. So to use your Todd Monken example, would the offensive line coach for the Ravens want to stick with Monken because he's familiar with the scheme and he is caught up on what Todd would want to run on the offensive side of the ball, whereas if he came here, just hypothetically speaking, to the Giants, if it's a new offensive coordinator, he's not necessarily familiar with the scheme,
sure,
it would take some time to acclimate. I'm just talking out loud, but all of these things you have to take into consideration. That's why we don't confirm anything from the team perspective for this very reason, but even anything that we talk about in passing, it's all report speculation until things are signed on the dotted line. And I'll go to the extreme case. If you remember, the Indianapolis Colts several years back thought Josh McDaniels was going to be their head coach.
They did.
And then look at how that fell apart. So you got to be very careful before you start penning in everyone every which way. And it's essentially a trickle-down effect in the National Football League, because even though Harbaugh has connections to the Ravens, if now one of his assistants gets a head coaching job, as you hit on, who's preventing him from taking some of Harbaugh's assistants who worked on the offensive side of the ball with him in Baltimore? There's relationships and connections across the board, and this is why it takes time to finalize a staff, and it also is why Joe Schoen and John Harbaugh, and Harbaugh even talked about this a little bit as an introductory presser, one of the first priorities before you even entertain going down to the Senior Bowl and moving forward with everything else is having conversations with your general manager about who's attractive to you, who you want to go after, and you've got to have backups. You've got to say to yourself, the event that Monken gets a head coaching job, in the event that Daboll gets a head coaching job, okay, who would we then turn to? Remember, the Chargers, John's brother Jim went through this where Mike McDaniel was interested in head coaching opportunities, but then he finally got him to sign on the dotted line to be the LA offensive coordinator.
We have a record-tying 10 NFL head coaching opportunities this season.
Yeah.
Think about that. 10. And an average NFL coaching staff these days has over 20 members on it, between all of the position coaches and the assistant position coaches and then
strength and conditioning,
the quality control guys and everything.
Yeah.
I mean, think about how many strands to the spider web, if you will, are connecting all of these different guys. 10 different head coaches are wind up changing jobs this offseason. So this is it's a ridiculous amount. Just do the math. A ridiculous amount of guys playing musical chairs, trying to find a seat before the music stops. And not just find a seat, but find the seat that they prefer.
That's 200 plus individuals, by the way, if you do the math of what you're talking about with respect to are on the move or at least need to be filled out. And there's going to be a number of names that are going to be now thrown out with Todd Monken going to Cleveland. But, clearly the team does not confirm any conversations. But I'll just reiterate, and this was a show that I didn't do with you. I was on with Matt Sitek. I went over year by year who his coordinators were and where they ranked. I think the one thing that is still very promising, Paul, about Harbaugh's track record, and he worked with 7 different offensive coordinators and 7 different defensive coordinators, the fact that he consistently chose individuals, whether he had a long-term relationship with them or not, and maintained a level of consistency, I think is encouraging, even if Todd Monken is no longer an option. And Todd was the most recent Ravens offensive coordinator. Everybody else that he worked with, I think, is at the point of their career where I just don't think he'd tap back into that well. I think it would be more of a new guy, maybe somebody who he'd want to promote that he worked with previously. Because, he worked with, it really is the who's who of veteran coaches. Cam Cameron was his first offensive coordinator, former Dolphins head man. Jim Caldwell, who did a really nice job with Indy and Detroit. Gary Kubiak, who was with Houston, helped the Broncos win a Super Bowl. Mark Trestman, the former Bears head coach. Marty Morningweg, who was on staff with him in Philadelphia.
These are
under
all very
Andy
well-known
Reid.
names.
Yeah, and these
very
are all,
well-known.
but these are guys that went on to become head coaches or were previously head coaches. And then Greg Roman, who then went to join forces with his brother Jim, who was just let go, and that's why Mike McDaniel is the Chargers offensive coordinator. Not to say that these are not individuals that he doesn't have relationships with to this day, but I think where, once again, these guys are in their careers, it would surprise me if he once again went in that direction. That's just my personal opinion.
Well, we all talk about how important it is to get the right guy to develop the young franchise quarterback. Now, on yesterday's program, when I had Mark Malusis here, I said flat out, if it were me, and I'm not telling Harbaugh or Shane what to do, that's not my place, and I certainly have no idea what they're talking about on the second floor. But if I were in charge of Team X, I would put a phone call into Charlie Weiss Jr. And I would say, listen, I know you've apparently withdrawn from the Jets job, but I'd like to hear your conversation. I'd like to have a conversation with you and hear you tell me no before I cross you off my list. Because in my opinion, and again, it's a unique situation because of where Jackson Dart is in his young career. This is a very critical time for him to be able to take that next big step between year 1 and year 2 as a NFL quarterback. I would probably want to lean more on that side of the decision-making process than trying to find somebody who I've known in my past. That would be my preference if it were me.
Sure. And, of course, Weiss Jr. having a tie-in to Ole Miss. That's why you're bringing him up. I think it's always good to think outside the box and bring in individuals that you haven't necessarily worked with. I think it gives you fresh perspective. But I think the other thing that connects to what you were just talking about, how critical this hire is, it's also the development of Jackson Dart, and somebody that does have a track record of developing and grooming young quarterbacks is something that I think if you're John Harbaugh, you want to take into consideration. Mm-hmm. So, you look at Todd Monken, for example, and he knew this firsthand, but, he worked with Baker Mayfield and Lamar Jackson, and, we could go through the laundry list of guys on the collegiate level. Remember, he was the Georgia offensive coordinator, Monken. He was the head coach at Southern Miss. So, offensive coordinators, and I'm just going to throw out a name. I'm not saying that this is somebody that the Giants are entertaining, but Cliff Kingsbury is still out there. Okay.
Yes, he is.
Now, Kingsbury has worked with a variety of different quarterbacks. Mm-hmm. Forget what happened in Arizona. He was just obviously also within the division with Jaden Daniels in Washington. But the individuals that he worked with when he was a college head coach, okay, the Baker Mayfields. I want to say he was with Davis Webb, too. Because remember, all of those guys came from the same location. Mahomes.
Yes.
I mean, that's a pretty nice group
it is.
of quarterbacks.
I mentioned Kingsbury yesterday.
Because that's another name that I think gets maybe lost just because he's a former head coach and so forth.
He would be on the list of people that I would probably make a phone call to. And quite honestly, so would Joe Lombardi. I mean,
who was just let go from the Broncos. Who was with the Saints previously.
He has had a long career on the offensive side of the ball and has worked with a couple of very big names. I'm just saying.
No, but I guess the reason why I'm bringing up some of these other names is the track record, I think, is very key for Harbaugh to look at because of where, to your point, Dart is at this stage in his career. I think, yes, you want a creative scheme. You need to prioritize everybody on offense, okay, because that OC is in charge of the entire facet. But Dart is only entering year 2, and this is already going to be, by the way, his second offense in as many years. And, Paul, we've seen this with other young quarterbacks, okay? Alex Smith I've brought up multiple times on this show. Mark Sanchez is another where it's a revolving door. You have to be cautious of what that does to potentially stunt the development and growth of your signal caller.
Well, I think this is one of the reasons why it was so important for the Giants to sign Jameis Winston to a 2-year contract and why Jameis Winston is going to be here. There's no question in my mind that he will be the Giants' backup quarterback in 2026. And it's not just because of the economics of the contract. It's because Winston was brought in here in part to help groom and nurture Jackson Dart. And that consistency in the quarterback's room is going to be very important because Brian Daboll, Mike Kafka, and Shea Tierney aren't going to be here. So, and neither will Russell Wilson. So who will Jackson Dart have? Well, he's got one of his other 2 quarterback buddies who he doesn't have Tommy DeVito anymore either since Tommy DeVito left before the season started. So think about that. He's lost 4 of his closest workmates, if you will, since he got to the Giants this past spring. The only guy who is still with him, that he can still say, hey, I have an attachment to him because he was here when I first got here, is Jameis Winston. He is a very important part of this growth process.
The other value, of course, of having Winston on the roster is, God forbid something happens to Dart, you feel good about him steering the scheme given what he produced this season, too. That's the other true value of giving him multiple years. No, I'm not downplaying his rapport and his relationship with Dart, but the other big reason why you want him still around is it's a good insurance policy to have. And remember, in years past, the Giants haven't had great depth at that position.
No doubt.
When the initial starter like a Daniel Jones would go down. So that's the other attractiveness, I think, if you're the Giants heading into next season.
I mean, if you did not want to put in a call to Charlie Weiss, if you just felt that, you know what, Charlie Weiss Jr. is a little too young yet, he doesn't have enough of a track record, for whatever reason, if you did not wish to call him and you gave up on the familiarity angle of the story, you're going to lean on Jameis Winston even more. If you bring in somebody who has no clue as to what Jackson Dart is all about, well, Winston is now going to have to be your telephone pole that you can lean on, because that's the guy who's going to give Dart the comfort and the mentorship that he's going to need. Because if there's no connection at all to the OC or the quarterback's coach, I mean, Winston becomes doubly important.
Well, and also Jameis has been in a lot of different schemes throughout his career.
He knows how to navigate it.
He can help Dart walk through that process. I think that will help him. I just think if you're John Harbaugh, once again, the debate you have to have internally is, do I make a hire that maybe appease is too strong of a word, but that is attractive and a tie-in to Dart, or do I prioritize the entire offense and somebody that can simultaneously develop the quarterback, has that track record, whether he has a tie to Jackson or not, and also bring some creativity and infuse something different that this offense may have not been exposed to? I personally would lean towards the latter more so than the former, because I think while Dart is critical, you can't lose sight in what you can bring out of Malik Neighbors and the offensive line and the tight ends and so forth, because as we talked about even earlier in the show, Paul, when you were talking about the coaching staff and the roster changing, and can coaches and GMs be patient when they bring in a quarterback who's here year one is not going to be here necessarily year two and year three. So you've got to think about what can help the entire umbrella as opposed to one section of it. So that's just at least how I would look at it. And I'm not necessarily turned away by somebody that has limited experience. If they feel that Charlie Weiss Jr., based on what he has done at the college level, could come in and take an offense and move it into a different territory, so be it. But I don't think necessarily the direct connection to Dart has to be the make or break aspect, I guess, during the hiring process. All right, let's head to the phone lines as we move forward here. We got John in Cape Cod joining us on BBKL. What's happening, John?
Good morning, Lance. Morning, Paul.
What's going on?
Guys, I really love the show. We're still getting
Thank you.
digged out here from a foot plus of snow. Just a couple of points. Of the Raven guys who are possibly targeted, my favorite pickup would be Ricard, the fullback. I think it's more than coincidental that every one of the Giants' Super Bowls was won with a true fullback.
Mm-hmm.
And I know the game has evolved in the 3 tight end thing, but, there's a guy who can catch the ball as well as be a monster blocker. So I wouldn't diminish his value as a multi-position player. The other thing is with the Senior Bowl, I didn't watch the game, but the guy who stood out to me this season in college was I believe he's a defensive tackle for Miami. I don't know if he's a senior, but against Indiana, the guy was in the backfield all the time, and he's a big boy as well. I just I can't think of his name.
Well, they've got a pair of pass rushers, the Hurricanes, who did a lot of damage. I mean, they were really good at getting after the quarterback. So it may be a few guys. Reuben Bain Jr. is one guy who I'm not sure if that perhaps is who you're thinking of, and Akeem Mesidor is the other guy. Yeah, both of those guys, very high production.
He was virtually unblockable in that game. Anyway, I'll get off and make time for other people, guys. Keep up the good work.
You got it.
Enjoy the show.
Well, thanks, John. Appreciate you tuning in and giving us a ring. I want to respond to his point about Ricard, and that is the fullback of the Baltimore Ravens, who he was referring to, who is a scheduled free agent. It's going to be interesting to see what type of a market he has. He was an undrafted player in 2017 who started out on the defensive side of the ball, that people forget. Then they moved him to the offensive side of the ball, and he made a heck of a transition. In 2022, he signed a 3-year extension, so he did not ultimately hit the market in that year, and that's why now he is going to have an opportunity. So the reason I bring that up, Paul, and we talk about this with a lot of players, if your representative finds out that this is your first opportunity to maybe cash in, I'm not saying that fullbacks get paid a gazillion dollars, but it's going to give him a chance to speak to a variety of teams. You also don't know what the new staff with Jesse Minter is going to think about him, depending on who the new offensive coordinator is. Eric DeCosta, the general manager, of course, knows a lot about what Ricard brings to the table. So it's a bit of a fascinating conversation for him because, A, we have never seen him hit the market. Fullbacks usually don't command a lot of money, but he's extremely versatile. He can play the defensive side of the ball. And Baltimore now has a new coaching staff. So that changes the configuration with respect to what may open up for him and whether or not he truly wants to stay in Baltimore too. Some guys, they've been there from 17 to this date. The team gave them a chance as an undrafted free agent. He may, hold that organization in very high regard, which I'm sure he does, regardless of what plays out.
Harbaugh has usually had a fullback on his roster. All the days that he was in Baltimore, he had a number of guys. And the thing that you don't know is at this stage of his career and with whoever the offensive coordinator is going to be, how much does he want to get out of that fullback? Would he consider a one-dimensional fullback and perhaps Elijah Chapman could fill that role.
Yeah, who we've seen in that position, at least going back to the preseason.
Now, he's not a multi-dimensional. He is a one-dimensional fullback. He is going to get in there, and he's going to help plow the way forward. You're not going to consider him as a pass catcher. You're not going to consider him, in all likelihood, of running the ball, even though he really wants to run the ball a little bit. I know he's told me that, very much so. You're going to put him in there, and you're basically going to tell the other team's defense, we're going to pound the football, and we're going to send Chapman right into the teeth of your defense, and he is going to plow the way open for the running back. It's just that simple. Is that the kind of role that Harbaugh envisions for his fullback this year? Because then you've already got one, and you don't have to go out and get another one. If he wants his fullback to be fully well-rounded, like Ricard, like Juszczyk with the San Francisco, which, by the way, he had been a Raven at one point. Juszczyk had been a Raven at one point. Do you want that type of fullback? A guy who you know can catch passes out of the backfield, who can actually run the ball on occasion, in addition to give you the kind of blocking that you need. What style of fullback? So it's not just what do you want a fullback, but what type of fullback do you want? And I do think at least it bears watching to see if Chapman could potentially be part of that mix.
I'm looking up, I was curious, I believe the Ravens had Vontae Leach.
They did.
Before Ricard, right?
They had
think
Leach.
He was the guy that came to mind.
Didn't they have Lorenzo Neal for a while,
Lorenzo
too?
Neal is a former Charger, too. He may have been, yeah. So Leach was 2011 to 2013. So then Ricard came in 2017. So I'd be curious who else may have been there. The reason why I'm bringing up some of these other fullbacks is, Leach was somebody that, he had a season where he caught 25 passes. That was in Houston, and he caught 21 with Baltimore.
Oh, there's no doubt the fullbacks that he's had over the years have been more of the multidimensional type.
Absolutely.
But I don't know how he feels today about that. I suspect, if you asked me, is he going to have a fullback? I suspect the answer is yes. Would he probably like a versatile fullback? I suspect the answer is yes, but I don't know.
It looks like in 2016, most of the individuals they utilized were conventional running backs. So they may have gotten away here or there without a definitive fullback, at least in the mix. I'm circling through some of the rosters in between Ricard and Leach. But while we look at some of those names, the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, and this goes back to what you were hitting on, as attractive as Ricard is in terms of his versatility, I think what gets lost is if you look at his numbers, he only had a high of 11 catches in any given season with Baltimore. The point is, he wasn't targeted that much, even though he had that skill set. And I think if you're Joe Schoen and John Harbaugh, you have to ask yourself, whoever the new offensive coordinator is, Paul, this is a big part of the conversation. Okay, if we were to bring in Patrick Ricard, how much are you going to utilize him as a receiver? How much are you going to target him? The point is, and I'm not saying that you got to break open the piggy bank, but if you're not going to utilize him because of the running backs and the wide receivers, it gets to the point, the bang for the buck philosophy. Is it truly cost effective to go that route, or do you bring in somebody who we were talking about, like a Chapman, who just can help bulldoze and open up the alleys on the ground?
That's exactly why I brought up the point, though, because you have two styles of fullbacks, the versatile fullback or just the straight-ahead battering ram. The battering ram you may have on your roster right now without any additional cost or expense.
Yep.
If that's the way you want to go, which, by the way, may not be the way that the coach wants to go, but maybe because of resources and other positions that need to get certain dollars to try to fill up some gaps in the depth chart, maybe he's forced to go with a one-dimensional battering ram fullback. Maybe he'd like to have one who's more versatile, but they don't have the resources to go get one. So, all right, I don't have any more money. We'll just let Chapman be the fullback. Could be that too.
Well, because $500,000 here, $1 million there, it adds up in the long run, even though we may not be talking about a position that is going to eat that much into the cap, but you may want to use those resources and delegate it elsewhere to
They may
attract
not be able
somebody
to
else.
give you your bonus this year if they go out and sign one of those guys.
Luckily, I don't count against the salary cap, nor does the coaching staff, by the way, which I think also gets lost in the conversation around this time of the year. Those are completely separate budgets. Not that anybody was losing sleep over this subject, indeed. One other thing that I wanted to get to before we wrap up shop is the Pro Football Hall of Fame has received a lot of attention, Paul, over the last few days.
Yeah, you're going to get me started again.
I'm going to start.
I've been angry for 48 hours.
Well, I think I know why you're angry, but I think from more of a national scale, it has to do with Bill Belichick, according to reports, not getting in on the first ballot, which is really short of laughable. It's hard to describe that more thoroughly, and I think it probably bears having a conversation, at least within the halls of the Pro Football Hall of Fame, about the process and who's involved and the standard. I think for the audience to understand, coaches and senior candidates go through a completely different voting process than the modern day players. That's the first thing that's important to understand. But even knowing that, and saying that some voters may have wanted to get some of the seniors in that have been waiting a long time. I know that's been thrown out. Mm-hmm. You still have, my main argument is, Paul, your primary goal is to vote for who is most deserving in your mind amongst the group of candidates and use that as the driving force. So even though somebody may be pulling at the strings of your heart, who you want to see get in because they've waited, Bill Belichick, okay, based on him being the first year on the ballot, based on his resume, it's simple. The priority is make sure you get the most deserving individuals in immediately. So I guess that's what rubs me the wrong way, regardless of all of the other thoughts that are in play here. And 80% is the standard, which I think is a good thing. You should have a very high standard to get individuals into the Hall of Fame. It should not be too much for Bill Belichick to get 80% of the vote in his first year of eligibility, regardless of who else is on the ballot.
All right. I'm not going to get into this. I'm going to make this very short and sweet. Why does there have to be a limit on only one coach per year?
Is there a limit, though,
there is.
Paul? There is? Okay, because I know you get the ballot for the seniors and the coaches. You have 5. You can only vote for 3.
Right.
That I know, and 80% is still the cutoff. So you do the math. If somebody said, oh, well, everybody else is going to vote for Belichick, so I'll leave him off, that could have happened, right? I mean, there is a reality circumstance where that plays out. But again, what irritates me, if that was your thinking, you're not then voting for an individual that is the most deserving. You're leaving it to somebody else to do the heavy lifting, and that's not your job as a voter.
Oh, no, it's not. Nor is it your job as a voter to make people wait. Because when you make those people wait, it backs up the tunnel for other people who now have to wait.
Yep.
I've used this example before. I will say this one time very quickly. Mike Holmgren, as well as Mike Shanahan and Tom Coughlin, from every Hall of Fame voter I have talked to, and I've talked about half a dozen of them, specifically about these guys, and they all say, oh, yeah, all 3. Absolutely, all 3. Is the guy a Hall of Famer? Check. Yes, he is. Is that guy a Hall of Famer? Check. Yes, he is. Is that guy a Hall of Famer? Yes. Check. Yes, he is. Oh, but we're only allowed to put 1 in a year. How dumb is that? How dumb is that? You have 3 qualified candidates. And by the way, Dan Reeves also is a qualified candidate who's now passed away and will never get to appreciate the fact that he belongs in and should get in. And hopefully one day will. Why are we making people wait? If the credentials are there, they're not going to add to their credentials, and the people who are voting would like to be able to vote for all 3 of them, why should they not be allowed to do it?
I'm completely with you.
It's dumb.
It should be the best deserving candidates, regardless of the position that they assumed during the course of football history, whether they were an executive, whether they were a coach, whatever. For example, in the modern day category, they don't say, well, there's a limit on how many running backs can go in this year. No, if 2 running backs get 80% of the vote, then 2 running backs go in. So that's how, to me, the operation should work. And as far as personal vendettas and biases. Listen, we're all human. We're all guilty of that. If you're going to vote, there should be no room for that. But anyone who wants to bring up Spygate, Deflategate, which, by the way, to this day doesn't have a smoking gun, or just Belichick's overall approach in press conferences, right? Because these are some media members, and I'm sure he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way.
Mostly all media members.
Well, it's a mix. On the senior committee, there's some executives like Bill Polian is on the committee.
But for the player, for the
for the
vote,
modern day players,
it's
correct.
all media.
Well, but I'm referring to Belichick, though. I guess that's what I was referring to, because
the coaches' blue ribbon committee, they call it.
Yeah, if you are going down the road of baggage, if you want to label it that way,
right.
I want to make it clear. The NFL already punished the Patriots and individuals.
They already did.
Who took part. It's not your job as a voter to then make up for what you think was left to the side. So that's going above and beyond your role. And as far as the player, the modern day, we don't know who got in, because remember, this is just leaking. We're going to hear at NFL Honors who gets in, but according to some reports, it seems as if Eli has fallen short again of the 80% threshold. And Paul, I'll go back to what I said last year, and I made it very clear. I said that if Eli does get in, I think he's going to have to wait. I think he's got a lot of competition. I mean, Drew Brees is eligible this year, and Larry Fitzgerald, okay? And we're going to get guys as the years go on, and it's going to make his pathway that much more difficult. I mean, that's the reality of the circumstance. I know Giants fans hold him in high regard, and I'm not disputing that. But the reality is, it's not the Giants Hall of Fame. It's the Pro Football Hall of Fame, and there is other stiff competition at both his position and elsewhere. Guys that are not even questions, and Brees and Fitzgerald are not even questions. You know, you don't have to have that debate. They're getting in this year. So that's percentage of the vote being taken away from Eli, and that's just the nature of the beast. And Jason Witten is another guy, by the way. I mean, arguably one of the greatest tight ends in NFL history. So he's the third one, I would say. All of those take away from the quarterback. It doesn't matter what position you played.
How about they just go to the baseball model instead of this stupid round-by-round model that the NFL uses? Just go to the baseball model.
I agree with you there.
Tell all the voters, hey, here's your ballot. You can vote for up to 10 people, yes or no. Oh, the ballots are all in? That guy got 75%. He's in. Why are we doing this round-by-round garbage? That's the problem. It's the round-by-round garbage, and I've talked to committee members who told me since they instituted that 2 years ago, it makes it triply difficult for certain guys to get in, especially guys who are on the fringe for a debate. So why are we doing that?
And the other,
why?
No, listen, there's no need to have rounds. Just put them on the ballot and let them vote, and if you get 80%,
yes
you're
or
in.
No.
If not, you're out. Yeah.
You get the percentage, you're in.
Sure.
Why are we doing this round-by-round stuff?
No, I mean, no disputing there. The other thing is there's a limit, too, by the way. You can have only a max of 5 players get in every year. So now you would think 80% of the vote, maybe that alone makes it challenging to get beyond 5. But I don't understand why there has to be limitations. The percentage of the vote should be the guiding force as to whether or not the door's open to you.
Correct.
It's as simple as that. There should not be any limitations on player, coaches, positions. Let the vote dictate everything.
And I leave you with this. I said it to Mark the other day. Only 2 former players are on the selection committee. 2, Dan Fouts and James Lofton. And they're on it because they're at-large voters, because they got on it through their network broadcasting jobs. Why? I don't understand. Why? Why are there not more Hall of Famers who can vote on their own club? Because they know what it took to play against those guys. They also know what it took to get into the Hall of Fame. Why are there not more Hall of Famers on the committee? Instead of loading up the entire selection committee, or most of it, there's some dignitaries on there, but it's all media.
No, there should be more diversity.
I leave you with this. I said this last night on another show that I was on. I'm going to say it here today. How does this make sense, folks? Harry Carson had to wait 13 years. 13 years to get voted into the Hall of Fame. All right? When he retired after the 1988 season. Just think about the logic here. He retired after the 88 season. He waited his 5 years to be eligible. And then from 93 to 2006, he was denied 13 years to get in. But in 2019, when the Pro Football Hall of Fame and the National Football League got together and named a panel of dignitaries consisting of NFL personnel people, media members.
That was that anniversary year.
And Hall of Famers and former great players. And they named the NFL's 100 top all-time players to their NFL anniversary team. And wouldn't you know it, Harry Carson immediately was on that list. So how could those people make him part of the NFL's 100th anniversary team in a heartbeat? Without any question, he was one of the top 100. How does he get on that team? And it took the voters, made up of all media, 13 years to figure it out. Explain logic to me there.
No, there should be more diversity amongst the voters. Just like in baseball, the baseball writers should not be the only ones that vote for Hall of Famers. Should be former players and executives as well.
So the committee, the makeup of the committee is screwed up, and the rules of the round by round is screwed up. Case closed. I have nothing more to say.
Yeah. No, there definitely needs to be more voices, and I'm surprised that it's taken this long for this part of the conversation to come up. But unfortunately, change on the Hall of Fame front goes by snails. Okay,
well, the board of directors is the Pro Football Hall of Fame board of directors are the ones who control this whole thing, and they put out some really nice, cutesy statement yesterday too. After all the controversy came out.
In fairness, in defense to them, though, Paul, the statement was meant towards, and I'll support them here. When you vote, you should not be speaking to media members and leaking what the results are. That's why the statement was released. The statement was not released really defending anyone in terms of why Belichick didn't get in. It was more of they're annoyed, and rightfully so, that somebody who voted spoke to a reporter and gave them an indication of why Belichick didn't get in. And that should not happen, because I would argue that eats away at the integrity of the process too.
I agree.
They have every right to at least defend that.
I'm done.
Quick read here before we wrap up shop. Special Olympics New Jersey's annual Snow Bowl is heading to Rutgers SHI Stadium in 2026. The annual flag football tournament will be on the field of Rutgers SHI Stadium from March 6th through the 8th, 2026. 6-on-6 tournament will feature competitive, recreational, and co-ed divisions, and all proceeds benefit thousands of Special Olympics New Jersey athletes across the Garden State. You can register your team today at njsnowbowl.org. That's njsnowbowl.org. As that is going to wrap up Thursday's edition of Big Blue Kickoff Live. It is presented by Cadillac, the official luxury vehicle of the New York Giants. Broadcasting from the Giants podcast studio, presented by Hackett Sac Meridian Health. Keep getting better. For Paul Dottino, I'm Lance Medow, signing off here on Big Blue Kickoff Live. Stay locked to Giants.com for all the latest, as we'll be back up and running on Friday right here at 12:30 p.m. Eastern. Have a good one.